Hi, I'm Garm1, and this is Midgardy RPG's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Chris Diaz from Diaz Ex Machina Games. How's it going?
Going well.
And your current project's Ultramodern 5, huh? What am I looking at?
Yes. I always do that whenever I'm talking to someone. I have this stupid thing my fiance gave me. I always bring it up into the shot. Yes, so Ultra Modern launched 2 days ago. We funded in 48 hours, which is solid. Really happy about that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I read the original Ultramodern 5 a while back, and the
Ooh.
Neurospazia setting, and
Oh,
it's been on my need to run list forever. But it's a long list, especially now that I
oh,
started doing these.
oh, I can imagine. So many people still want to play classic fantasy, but the sci-fi 5e stuff is getting a lot more popular. I think we were the first to release a 5e product, I think, for a non-fantasy setting, just because we had access to the 5e rule set before a lot of other people. Um, that's the whole story, because it was I signed on to the fourth edition GSL rules, which were a lot of people complained were highly restrictive, but I thought they were very liberating. And it was me and like three other people signed on to the GSL, where everyone else screamed bloody murder and ran off to the hills. And we were producing stuff for the GSL for about for the entire length of that license. And I think that kind of brokered us some favor with Wizard and Mike Merles, because you saw like there were people producing content and supporting Wizard in that time. So he reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to get onto the friends and family playtest for Dungeons and Dragons?" And I'm like, "Yes, please, thank you." And so I got access to the really early rules, way before a lot of other people did, and that was really awesome. But it also gave me an opportunity to see that rule set and kind of have an idea how I wanted to do a sci-fi variation before a lot of other people had a chance to do so. That being said, that alpha test was almost unrecognizable to what we saw as modern fifth edition.
Yeah,
Some of the alterations were like some of the old early designs were not good. Like there were some nice ideas, but I keep those to myself, because I know some of the political issues that happened behind the scenes after that. So I thought it was really fascinating to see the shuffling of certain personnel, the departure of certain personnel, and then when we got the next set of rules, it was a lot closer to what we know as modern fifth edition. But yeah, so we were able to put out a fifth edition book well before a lot of other people were prepared to.
that's cool. Yeah.
That's
Uh,
my answer.
that's all good. I never
Yeah.
played much fourth edition. When I did, I didn't really like it, but
It was an acquired taste. I mean, I enjoyed the hell out of it. I I liked, this is one of those things where when you're a game mechanic guy, like a guy who likes making rules, right? Fourth edition was really good because it was very strict. It had a very good system of balance where people, and this is kind of a fault and a compliment, people wanted in a tabletop pen and paper role playing game to be more freeform, be more improvisational. They'll say, forget what the rules say. Can I do this kind of like? And then a GM may kind of improvise. And in fourth edition, it gave you a much more structured, rigid system, which made it really easy for dungeon masters to create adventures and to say, and so you don't get into a situation where players are taking advantage of a GM by trying to convince them to do something that they shouldn't be able to do. And the fourth edition gave you that structure to say yes you can or yes you can't. So there were some advantages and disadvantages to it. I mean, I was a bit cold to fifth edition originally, but I've warmed up a lot in the last few years.
yeah. My position on fifth is that it's functional. It's not the best role playing system in the world. Advantage and disadvantage is really cool.
What was your favorite? Like, what's your favorite?
It's it's hard.
I
I
know that you don't want to say it publicly, or
I no, it's just there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of stuff I haven't had the chance to actually try. Thankfully, my group is very open to trying whatever weird crap I throw on the table each week. Um,
yeah.
but it's
I don't play enough variety. That's the thing. I mean, when we wrote the original Amethyst Quintessence, I wrote the 13th, 8th, 4th edition, 5th edition, and Pathfinder editions, and then Chris Stilson wrote the Savage World and Fate Core. So despite doing the layout of those two books, I have no idea how their rules work. I've heard some good things about those two systems. I know some people really love Fate. I like writing for 13th Age, 4th edition, and 5th edition. I'm not a fan of writing for Pathfinder. I find the monsters are too difficult to write for. But I mean, back in the old days, despite I've been role-playing since I was a fetus, so I would say that going through my history, most of my teens, I wasn't playing Dungeons and Dragons. I was playing the Artel-Zorian games. So the fusion system and the interlock system, which is a D10-based system, those were my bread and butter.
Yeah, those are some names I haven't heard in a while. Actually, no, I will take a position. I will make a call. The Sprawl, powered by the Apocalypse, that is the best game I've ever played. I ran it. It is so smooth, it felt like it was running itself. It helps it's a genre I'm super into, but it was good. It was probably my most enjoyable role-playing experience so far.
There you go.
Just took me a minute to remember which one. Yeah. So yeah. Tell me a little bit about Ultramodern. Is it officially pronounced Ultramodern 5 or just Ultramodern?
I call Ultramodern 5 for a couple of reasons. Obviously, because it's for 5th edition, and because there is an Ultramodern 4.
Right.
So Ultramodern originally began as because there was a lot of people complaining. Because when I made Amethyst Foundations for 4th edition, a lot of people complained that I was deviating too much from the 4th edition philosophy. And then I would try to confront people, not aggressively, and go, okay, tell me what that is. What's that philosophy? And they'd be like, well, the philosophy. I go, well, no, what does that mean? And people were just saying like, well, because 4th edition tells you all the things that you can do, and you're telling people all the things that they can't do. And I'm like, but yes and no is polar. You can just reword something into a yes question, into a yes answer, to a no answer. It all depends on the wording. And some people thought I was deviating too far. So when I said, you know what, I'm going to take that challenge and deviate even further. And some people said you couldn't do science fiction in 4th edition. I said, well, that's not true at all. So I went off after I did Amethyst Foundations. I took all that architecture and I said, I'm going to break the philosophy completely and go completely on my own and do something that's completely deviating from anybody's expectations. And I made Ultramodern 4, which broke up the class structure, how the system worked, played around with combat, played around with a whole bunch of rules, and by some shock, people loved it. So oddly enough, despite people criticizing Amethyst Foundation, suddenly people started embracing Ultramodern 4. So when I did Amethyst Quintessence, which is the 5th edition version of Amethyst, it just seemed logical that I would take all the sci-fi rules out of Amethyst and then detach the setting out of it and then create Ultramodern 5. And I was expecting it to do well. I was not expecting it to go platinum in a month. Like, that was nuts.
Yeah, I bet. I've looked through Ultramodern 5. I know approximately what it's about. Why don't you tell our viewers at home what the foundational differences from standard 5th edition are?
Well, the important thing when it comes to those systems is that I feel very strongly that unless you're creating something where the setting takes dominance, you should always kind of keep yourself compatible to 5th edition's architecture. So Ultramodern 4 and 5 always try to keep themselves true to the original idea of those rule sets. So 5th edition, I think I add like 3 skills and maybe a handful of a couple new rules. But they're all built on the foundation of 5th edition. So I don't change how classes work. There are a few things we do add. For example, in fantasy, there's this push for magical items. You need loot. But in sci-fi games, unless you're playing a game version of Destiny, you're not constantly swapping your guns out every 30 seconds. You're constantly not finding a bunch of new loot. I have nothing against including that as an idea. It's something that I've been thinking about, but some people like that type of consistency. So a lot of times they're keeping their weapons or keeping their armor for a very long period of time. So not swapping things out constantly. So you have to kind of offset the fact that they're not gaining a bunch of new loot. So we have this system called a ladder system, which is kind of this sequence of character boosts that you get that kind of take the place of magic items. And they're more about kind of how you are as a person. So there's there's one called a runner, which is dex and strength based. You can be a born leader. These are These are kind of like aspects of your personality, but they actually have a physical, physical effect on you. And then as you reach certain levels, you gain more and more bonuses. So they give you more and more things. They also give you the option of alternative feats as well. So you can, as you expand your character, you can choose between taking a general regular feat or taking one of these ladder feats, which are much more highly specialized. And a lot of people responded well to that. We had a vehicle combat system in the first game, which I thought it worked, but it was kind of very clunky. And I'm hoping to rebuild that. And the big thing I want to do with Ultramodern is to deal with is to expand the gear system. So there's a lot more weapons, a lot more armor, and I want to scale it up so we can get into giant robots and mecha and play around and bring some of the things that I learned from the old Talzorian days in the 90s and bring that into the fold. The other thing we did is we took and we created a life path system. Now the life path system came from an idea we had back in the old days. There's this game which you obviously probably know called Cyberpunk 2020.
Yeah.
Mike Pondsmith's tour de force, like his magnum opus. And in it was a refined version of a life path system, which we originally saw back in Mech and Zeta. But that life path system was where you would you could roll or choose for every aspect of your character. I mean, your eye color, your hair color, your siblings, how many friends and enemies, what happened to your lover. And regardless of which game we would play, regardless of whatever rule system we played, my group of friends, as they evolved, as people moved in and out, all of them unanimously wanted to use this system to create their characters, right? So we were doing it for D&D, we were doing it for alien stories, we were always pulling this system, even though we weren't using the interlock rules from Cyberpunk 2020. We were still using this life path system. So I decided it was about time that I created a new one. So I created an entirely original one based off of the style of the Talzorian Cyberpunk 2020, where you could roll every year, something happens every year or not. Perhaps you get money, perhaps you get skills. Maybe you go to jail, something like that happens, and you build up this whole life path. And it ended up being a really popular item. And by funny coincidence, the year and a half after Ultramodern came out, Xanthar's Guide to Everything came out by Wizards, and they, by some strange coincidence, included a nearly identical system. So there's been some accusations on some of my fans that WotC kind of lifted the idea from me. I was like, at least admit that they got it from the same sources I did. If they said, "Oh, we were inspired by our Talzorian system," they're like, "No, it's entirely our idea." I'm thinking, "Oh, come on, we both ripped off the same source."
Yeah,
but yeah, those are the big ones.
Yeah. There were a lot of interesting life path systems. Can you die in character creation in yours? Because that's always my favorite feature.
No, I think that's weird. I think that's weird. You can go to jail. You can have a bounty on you. You can have a physical deformity, like you can get like scarred. I kept the physical. I kept the amount of disabilities to a minimum. Like, so it's mostly things that are role playing related, but not ones where you roll a die and suddenly you take a -2 to dex. I kind of avoid doing that because I think it's mean spirited. I don't want the random number generator to bugger up someone. I also want to make sure that there's an equal measure of salt and spicy. I truly think that people don't want to just die in character. I mean, I've heard about that, but it's not something I'm interested in.
I just find it kind of funny.
Yeah. It's funny. I've heard a couple of systems that have done that, but it's one of those situations where I'm like, it feels like a waste of time.
Yeah,
it's almost like there's a game in itself. Like you're rolling things. Oh, my character didn't make it out of character generator.
Yeah, Twilight 2000 and Traveler, I think, are the big ones in that regard. Twilight 2000, really? You can just die of old age if you go too long. So you say that you left the class system basically how it is in 5th edition, but as far as I recall, it's a little bit different in Ultramodern. You can pick any archetype with any class. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was one thing we ended up doing. We ended up splitting the archetypes apart. Because back in the old days in prestige classes, you could do that with 3.5. You could, as long as you met those somewhat arbitrary sometimes requirements, you could do that. So for me, I felt that just felt natural, especially because that's something I pulled off from Amethyst. Because Amethyst, I was just like, well, we have this Limshao Custodian, which is type of this defender of this city. And I was like, that doesn't have to be tied to a fighter. You could have a ranger, you could have a paladin, you could have a wizard. So it's like we just took that kind of concept and then peeled it over. So I don't think that's a huge break. That's just it's a relatively minor one. Like I said, it's not one of those situations where it's really breaking the core of the system. Like we're not changing attribute skills or changing how combat works. There is a subset of optional rules we plan on including in the new Ultramodern 5, which is not in the official current Ultramodern 5, which is all called Ultra Max. And Ultra Max does include altered rules that makes modern storytelling a bit more realistic. Right? So it's like you're like, oh, I'm taking damage. I'm still 100%. Like, no. Every take damage, things happen. Like combat, it's harder to hit people, but when you hit someone, it hurts a lot. Armor now contributes to damage resistance rather than increasing your AC. And then when you get hit, you're constantly rolling for injuries that are perpetual and long lasting. These are entirely optional, but so they won't be considered. They won't be like integrated with the core of Ultramodern. But they're going to be in that system and available to people, so they can create something that's a lot more realistic.
Right, because one of the major criticisms of 5e that I hear often is that it is really hard to actually kill anybody and make things threatening. Especially with
when I play my fantasy game, I usually in Amethyst, going back to Amethyst, I pulled a lot of the resurrection and raise dead spells out of the setting, so it made it a lot more difficult. So when characters die, it was effectively permadeath. So characters tried to avoid being killed. I know there's a 5th edition spell Revivify, which I've allowed because it is kind of a bring someone back just from the brink. Not someone's like, oh, he's ashes. Well, 3 years from now, we'll raise him from the dead. Like, no, you can't do that. But yeah, that's always something that's always been a point with. That being said, that we also include rules for stuff like last man standing and stuff like that, where you can still do things. And it's in Ultra Max, it's actually harder to kill someone because you can't come back. It's one of those balances, right? Where in old 3.5 or even back in the old D20 system, you could just die. You could just walk and just blow up. And like the old modules to do that, they would just create these really stupid, inane, one single die roll kills your character forever. But don't worry, so cast a spell, we'll bring it back. So 5th edition took a little bit of that out, but it did make it more difficult to kill someone. But yeah, but back in the old days, you basically had 9 lives because characters were being popped off like nothing.
Yeah, but like I think the one I take issue with is resetting the death saving throws every time somebody gets back up. So you basically have 3 turns to like get them 1 HP and then they're back to fine, effectively.
Yeah, there are some rules like that. Yeah, I mean, the systems are never perfect, but ultimately they want people to have fun. I mean, the DM is ultimately, that's just what I've always said. I think the DM or the GM, I say GM a lot most of the time, is effectively the god. So whenever, like, I don't tolerate those people that just like, you can't do that, says right here in the book. I'm like, DM is the word of God. GM runs the show. So, you know, if he alters the mechanics of the universe, then so be it. Right?
Right. So why don't you tell me about some of the weirder settings for Ultramodern? You have one particular one for this Kickstarter, don't you?
Well,
Affinity.
there's actually, in the original Ultramodern, there wasn't an established setting. Then we made Neurospasta, which is a cyberpunk, and then Apex, which is superheroes. Now we're planning on pulling some of the mechanics from those games to put into the new version, but I'm not pulling the settings. So if you read Ultramodern 5 on its own, there's this, it implies this weird setting that has mutants and demons and net running and all this stuff. It's not going to look like Shadowrun, but it's going to be this weird, because it's going to be referencing things and you're not going to know how these things combine. And the point is, they're not really supposed to combine. You could read it and it's almost like Greyhawk back in the old days, right? Like Greyhawk back in the old days, it was the established setting, but it was just this generic background, right? It wasn't until we got into the Greyhawk box adventures did you actually know about the world itself. And so there's the implication that there is a setting, but one of the unlockables, if we get to it, is something called Affinity. Now, Affinity was a project that we were working on after Amethyst that we kind of put on the shelf, that we developed quite a bit, me and Nick. And the idea is they're 3 identical rule structures using the same three settings using common points. So affinity is this weird pseudo techno fantasy, this steampunk, and then this epic mecha space opera. And they all share the same terminology, the same kind of, like, every single time I label something, it has to be labeled identically in all three settings. And every time Nick does an illustration, he has to do the illustration in three different forms. So if he has a character in a certain pose, that character has to be a certain pose in all three settings. He has to do in the same illustration 3 times. So a steampunk, a fantasy, and then he has to do one in the space opera. So that was kind of the challenge. So if you see these 3 books, they pair up, they rhyme with each other. And so one of them is set in a colossal orrery, which is, those full, those scale models of the universe back they used to make in the old medieval times.
Right.
Like, take that, but actually full scale. So the planets are actually joined up with each other with big umbilicals. And it's a fantasy world upon this kind of mechanical structure. And the second one's on an alien, is on this alien. It's a human alien colony, and that's very much steampunk. And it's a completely mechanized planet. And then we have another one, which is a space opera, which deals with a colossal colony vessel, and then these different factions fighting for control. And that was going to have giant robots in it and so forth. So there's a little bit of science modern in all of them, but one of them's like 80-20 fantasy, the other one's about 50-50 fantasy, and the other one's about 20-80 the other side. So those are 3 settings. The first one, Paradise, which is set in this giant orrery, that one's almost 100% written. The other 2 are in their designing phases. So I'm hoping we get to that campaign and we get that unlocked, because I would love to dive into that. And it's going to offer more. Those are going to be mostly setting, because it's going to use Ultramodern 5's architecture to come to fruition.
That's super cool. Those sound pretty interesting.
I hope so.
And you've got stuff for cyberpunk, Weird West, urban fantasy, all that.
Yeah, the Weird West one is going to fall into the steampunk one. So the steampunk affinity settings going to have a lot of Weird West cowboy stuff. That was one thing where in the original Ultramodern 5, we said you can make all these settings, but we didn't give you specific rules on each individual one. We just gave you guns and armor and so forth and said, just rebrand them. And some people were just like, yeah, but you don't really have steampunk items. I was like, well, no, but you could just rebrand it. And I was just like, okay, maybe for the new redo, we'll actually include steampunk items and Weird West occult items, and just create this. Still not sure how we're going to organize it. If we're going to give you guys like different tables for each setting, or just create this giant one with little icons that tells you what type of setting this is used for, or let people figure it out. You think, well, I think the possessed 6-shooter is probably going to be the Weird West one. I'm just,
Yeah, speaking of Weird West magic stuff, it mentions that one of the possible stretch goals is a new magic system. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so from way back in the old days, D&D's always had basically the exact same magic system. And this will probably annoy some people, but I've actually enjoyed some of these newer magical ideas that we've seen developed in some board games. There are some brilliant magical systems that are either card-based, that are token-based, or when you create an engine where you're feeding off of other things and so forth. So my desire with the occult magic system for this Weird West is to develop a magic system where you're creating spells rather than saying, I cast Fireball, right? I would much rather you be able to develop skills to create a chain that allows you to connect and make something that's completely customizable. Because that's something we're developing with the equipment section. Because this is another thing which may not be popular. I love Dead Space, but I like Dead Space 3 a lot. I mean, it's not my favorite, but I love it. And one of the things about Dead Space 3 I loved is the fact that they have one of the coolest construction system where you can take this part and this type of machine, you put it together and it becomes a saw blade gun. But you take this piece off and put this on, suddenly it's an electrical gun. But you swap this part and put that part on, it becomes a pulse weapon. It's like every single combination does something different. And I like the idea of doing that for equipment to give people the rules in order to literally slap things together. And that's one of the unlockables. This construction system allows people to build equipment that maybe I've not thought of. And I'd like to create a magic system that does that as well, where you can combine certain things and create a spell that may be wholly unique to you. And as you combine more and more these elements together, the spell can become more powerful. And as you go up in level, you can combine more and more elements together until you've chained something that is wholly strange and unique. And I like that idea of having somebody simply move resources on a tableau and go, I'm going to cast this spell, it's going to use these resources, rather than saying I cast Fireball or I cast Lightning Bolt, where you can have one spell that can accomplish a dozen different effects, and you get that, right? It's much more free verse. The problem is going to be balancing it, but I think it's possible with level and then system, so forth. Some people might complain with it and say, I want to play a tabletop role-playing game. I don't want to muck around with board game components. But I think board games are extremely popular. I think learning from some of these new mechanics that are being introduced from these amazing developers, I think it's entirely valid. I think there's something we can learn from some of these board games without bringing an actual board into play, but still allowing people around a table with dice. I was talking with a backer just 2 days ago, and he was talking about loot cards, which I'd never really heard of, like getting a card that has a magic item. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have a card-based character sheet, right? And like one sheet is like your strength and have all your things, and then your weapons. And as you, instead of writing your weapons down on a sheet, you swap out that card, and this is your weapon, this is your weapon, this is your tools. And so your character sheet is just this tableau of like 20 cards rather than a single character sheet. I know some people were like, no, I want to be able to lay back on a couch with a clipboard. I went, yeah, but I don't know anyone who plays like that. Almost everyone I know plays around a table or plays around several tables. So I love the idea. And if our campaign gets to a successful level, I may seriously pursue that. I really like the idea of a card-based character sheet where you can just simply swap out the cards for what you have, right?
Yeah, that could be pretty cool, especially if you can get it to work with like a standard 9-card like binder sheet thing. You know the one I mean?
Yeah, there's this is a weird coincidence. I do reviews for the Dice Tower, and one of the games I review was a game called Apocrypha. Now, Apocrypha was developed by the same guy who did the Pathfinder card game. And although it doesn't work so well with him, but in the Apocrypha game, your character sheet is a tableau of it can get to be a tableau of 9 cards. So you get a central card, and as you get further on, as you develop more powers, you get cards around this called your halo. It's called a halo. And you get this ring. And so you can make a sheet, and that becomes your character because it has your halo of abilities around it. And I think that's brilliant. Oddly enough, that's not in the Pathfinder card game, but I think it's a brilliant mechanic. That's another one of these, I think, awesome ideas I think we can learn from as to kind of deviate from these traditionals of having stats, numbers, equipment, and then values. I really like the rule systems they're playing around. Like Fate does that a lot from what I know about Fate. Fate's like, you know what? Improvise. The more creative you are, the better. That's what I like about 13th Age too. 13th Age took 4th edition, which everyone thought was structured, and stripped the structure out of it, took the board out of it, and created a system where you still had this really easy to learn system of 4th edition, but stripped all that complexity out to simplify the system. And I thought what they did was brilliant. Plus, they backed my original Amethyst campaign, so I have a soft spot. The 13th Age community is awesome. I think they're very small, unfortunately a bit too small, but they are super wonderful people.
Yeah, one of my buddies is really big into 13th Age, and he keeps being like, "Oh man, I have this campaign I really want." And I'm like, "Run it for me then." But we'll see. But yeah, I'm interested in that magic system. One of my big complaints about 5th edition is I don't like Vancian casting. I think spell slots are boring.
My rules never sound vague when I explain them. It's because one of the things I plan on doing is trying to get a lot of feedback. So when people start seeing the playtest rules as we publish them, as this campaign progresses, someone says, "Oh, this is a horrible system." I was like, "Okay, well, tell me why. Let's fix it. Let's make it well. Let's make it good." I mean, when Amethyst Foundations came out in 2008, I had a critic who went on RPG Net, and listed all the things that was wrong with Amethyst Foundations. And I went, okay, all right. Well, and then I talked to the guy like, okay, let's look about it. Let's make a system work. Let's fix it. And then I came out with Amethyst Evolution, which presented some alterations, presented new characters, and kind of altered it and kind of fixed the system. Foundations was made by Goodman Games, and Evolution was done by my own private label. And as for that guy that criticized me, well, he's my editor out of Edmonton. and he's employed. He's my permanent editor.
Hell yeah, man. There's nothing. There are a few things that are more like disappointing in their reviews. It's just like, this game sucks. 1 star. That's it.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I'm on drive-through. I got a 4.5 average out of 5. So I'm out of with 50, 40, like 35, 40 books. So I'm really, really lucky. But I mean, but like I have a 1-star review for Pathfinder Renaissance 2.0, and his 1-star review was because of how dark the book comes when you order it on print on demand. I'm like, that has nothing to do with me. that's Lightning Source that printed you a bad book. That has nothing to do with me.
Oh.
One of my first negative reviews was a guy who claimed I was a anti-humanist lackey with a creationist agenda.
Was that for Amethyst? Or
yeah, that was for Amethyst. My first Amethyst book, and somebody in the hierarchy of drive-through deleted the review and said, it's like, clearly this guy never read your book, because there is nothing of the sort presented in that story. That was the only incident that happened. It's likely I have not had any really, like, knock on wood, I haven't had any really big problems since then. So,
well, that's a weird review to leave. Yeah,
that was a bizarre one. I was angry. I was just like, what
does that even mean? Yeah.
It's like, I'm an atheist. How do I have a creationist agenda if I'm an atheist? It doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, some people are. I
mean, Amethyst. One of Amethyst's big defining features is that I take prophecy and gods out of the setting. So everything is about faith, but not proof, right? And that's a big distinction. So it's just kind of weird. It's like, well, why would you say it's got a creationist agenda since I'm stripping gods out of my setting?
Yeah. I mean, I've got like explicitly Christian themed games sitting behind me, somewhere.
I know. Yeah. Well, the thing is that by default, almost all fantasies are something they are theistic. Depending on doesn't matter who writes them, they are incredibly theistic. Like, they just assume gods exist. And I'm much more interested in developing a setting where, instead of being prophecy and gods intervening, that maybe we are on our own.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember that one game setting, Midnight. There's a system called Midnight, came out for 3.5 quite a few years ago. And in Midnight, it basically it was kind of like Middle Earth, but the gods all died and gods all faded. And then the orcs all won. So it was this really dismally dark setting. And I love Dark Sun, because Dark Sun is also kind of the setting that strips kind of that idea out. I love those settings where either there were gods and they're gone, or they were never there to begin with.
Right. Yeah,
but which is really problematic with D&D, because D&D assumes that a cleric exists. So how do you make a cleric in 5th edition when you don't have proof of God? So it becomes a variant spellcaster where you're channeling that same source of magic as a sorcerer, but you believe it's coming from a theistic source, where a sorcerer believes it's coming from a completely non-intelligent source.
Right. But yeah, back to Ultramodern.
Yeah, it's
all good.
Go off topic.
It's all good. It's how it goes.
Yeah.
Any other particular elements you want to highlight?
One of the biggest things, like I said, is we are replacing all the artwork. Like Nick Greenwood worked with a guy named William Miller for the original Ultramodern, and he also did the work for Norris Basta and Apex as well. But Nick Greenwood's primary forte is in his amazing full color illustrations. The last Kickstarter we did for Amethyst was a full color reboot. Amethyst Factions, which was the culmination of that Kickstarter, got released last month, and it looks astounding. And Nick's doing a bunch of really high quality full color illustrations that you can see in our Kickstarter campaign. And we're making the whole book like that. It's going to be it's going to be hugely full color. It's going to have a lot of increased production value on top of the new rules, new combat, new spell system, new revised classes, new races, incorporating all these other ideas into a single book. But for me, it's going to be the presentation of that final work, which I'm looking forward to the most.
Well, I'm also looking forward to it. There's some pretty cool stuff there, and I'm always interested in people breaking 5e in ways that it's not really meant to.
I'm glad the community is like that. I said 4th edition, there was a lot of people against breaking that mold. Pathfinder, I didn't have a problem with. And when I hit 13th age, I was expecting a lot of resistance, and I was surprised that people said, "Oh my God, thank you, this is amazing." breaking that system and trying to play with it really worked well. But on the other hand, Chris Stilson got a lot of flack for his Fate edition.
Yeah.
I said I don't know the system, but he told me he got a lot of negative flack from people for the changes he did to the rule system. I 100% support him. I think you should play with the system however you see fit. But yeah,
that's I don't know much about Fate. It's a little too narrative and like it's a little too meta currency heavy for my taste, and that's most of what I know about it.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Which is weird. I entered the system. I still don't know how to play. Like aspects. What do these mean again?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, it's kind of obtuse in a lot of ways. Which if you like Fate, that's fine. No judgment here, but it's just not really my jam.
Yeah, the rule right now is Savage World is getting their second printing, so people are wondering if we're going to be supporting Savage World for Amethyst or not. I go, it's really up to my editor. If he wants to write for the new edition, that's entirely his choice.
Yeah. So, how did you get into tabletop gaming?
I go back to fifth edition. I go back to basic red box. I mean, I played D&D back grade 7. That's when I kind of walked into it. And that would have been 19. And then we got moved from D&D. We played D&D for about 2 years. Then we moved on to maybe 4 or 5 years. Then we moved on to Artel Zorian. We found Mechton. We were big anime fans. We loved Robotech. Did a little bit of Palladium Robotech. Did a lot of Palladium. I actually own almost every single Palladium Robotech book on my bookshelf. I didn't throw a lot of stuff out. I did throw some stuff out. I don't know why I threw out. I actually had original copies of Star Frontiers, Gamma World, and Top Secret, and I don't know why I threw them out. It's just like when you're like 14, 15, you want to empty out your area. I don't know why, but some of my biggest regrets is throwing out my original copies of Star Frontiers and Gamma World, like original first printings. I still have a first printing of AD&D still, Legends of Lore and a few other classic AD&D books. I have a crap ton of West End Star Wars books. A bunch of my friends gave their collection to me, so I have this colossal D&D, Star Wars RPG, which I've never played and will never play, because I mean I did play West End. I played a lot of the West End Star Wars, but that's just kind of not my bag anymore. But then we got into Mechton. We were heavy Cyberpunk till 2020. We did Mechton for years. We played it constantly. Then I got forced into a GURPS. I want to say forced into GURPS. I need to stress forced because it wasn't my decision. We ended up playing GURPS for about 3 years on a sci-fi setting called Pathfinder, coincidentally. Mm-hmm. That was in the 90s. And then when 3.5 came out, I didn't play a lot of second edition. It was basic AD&D, and I almost skipped second edition entirely. And then my friends say, we're going to play 3.5, make a setting. So I made Amethyst, and then we played Amethyst for 11 years. Wow. Like literally, it was from 2000 to 2011 we were playing Amethyst. I actually think it passed that too, but the primary trilogy, the 3 big campaigns we ran was an 11-year campaign. And then after that, I did a Ghost in the Shell game, which I did as a homebrew, which I have a homebrew website, which is hiding out there somewhere in the ether. And then, so I've been running 3.5 ever since. I've not deviated from that. So I went from 3.5 to 4th to 5th and so forth. I've played very little Pathfinder. For someone who's been writing Pathfinder for 5 years, I've played precious little Pathfinder. But thankfully, because I play 3.5 so much and play a lot of 5th edition, it's in the same spectrum. It's just, one's blue, one's green. It's in the same spectrum. The systems are so similar. Like, I haven't played 13th Age. I've never played 13th Age. And yet people love the rule system I did to it because I know 4th edition so well. And 13th Age is 4th edition light. So it's a really easy system to write for. And that's why I wouldn't even dream of trying to write for Savage World of Fate, because the systems are so different than standard D20. But yeah, so D20 from at least 20 years of D20 variations. But growing up, it was all about what Mike Pondsmith produced, which is the reason why I'm so excited for Cyberpunk 2077, because that's his setting and that he helped develop as a video game. Oh yeah, take my money.
Yeah, I'm also pretty pumped for that. The only Cyberpunk game I've actually, the only Mike Pondsmith Cyberpunk game I've had the pleasure of playing was Cyber Generations, which
oh really?
Yeah, we did a Cyberpunk fundraiser stream a while back for the EFF. Cyber Generations is one of the ones that we did. It's weird, but it does character generation as its own little adventure, which is super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got For me, it was Mecton. It was Mecton 2, Mecton Zeta, Cyberpunk 2013, and then 2020. And the 2020 is what kind of defined him. Then there was a whole thing with them in Hero Games, and then they kind of took their interlock system and made Fusion. And they did a whole bunch of anime editions for Fusion, including Bubblegum Crisis and Bottoms and a few others. Then I went and took the Fusion system, which was the first kind of semi-attempt at an OGL. Like when 3.5 hit OGL, that changed gaming environment forever. But until then, there weren't a lot of free systems you could write for. And Fusion was one of the first ones who did that. So I made a Fusion game based off Alien/Aliens. And that kind of started my career in game writing, because I wrote this Alien Fusion campaign, which became very, very popular. And then I posted it on my website, and it went off from there. But Fusion was my bag for the longest time. I think D10, like a skill scale of 1 to 10 and a die roll between 1 and 10 is a very nice and even and fair random number generator. I think it's a good system.
Yeah, absolutely. D20 is very swingy, unfortunately.
Well, like I said, if you got into the alpha playtest for 5th edition, you want swingy? Wow. I wrote a very big article to Mike about the random number generator issue in the core alpha system. And when they came out with their next set of rules, that was heavily scaled down. I'm not even kidding. I'll tell you, this is something that people don't know. In the original alpha edition for in D&D, the magic system had contested rolls. Right?
Yeah.
So you would roll for your defense, and then he would roll his attack. But in that early edition, also didn't have base attack bonus, was gone. Right? So you only got the bonus from your attribute. You never got any bonuses from your level. So that base attack bonus that we're used to in 3.5 Pathfinder 5th edition wasn't there. So your variable, your fixed variable, was just your attribute, like 4. And then the other enemy had a variable of 3 or 4. But since you're both rolling die 20, you only had like a 6% effect, because you had now a variation between 2 and 40, and you could only affect 4 of that. So it became entirely based on what the numbers, like your skill meant only about 10% of the final result. And I was just like, no one's going to like this system because they're not contributing, you know? So, and then when they came out with the second printing, with the second set of rules, and they expanded the playtest, that system had completely been thrown out. And I'm like, oh, thank God. But the only thing from that original core that made it through was advantage, disadvantage, the rolling die 20s and taking the higher result, which is also very much a board game mechanic. That was the only thing that started from the get-go and lasted all the way to the end.
Yeah, and would I be right to guess that the con save, wisdom save, like dex save stuff on some spells is kind of a descendant of that original idea?
You know, I can't remember whether or not that was. I do know that the archetypes had, like, there were these different sub builds in the same way that 4th edition, when you had a fighter in 4th edition, you could be this fighter or this fighter, and they gave you different skill sets you can deviate. They had that type of deviation, and that became those archetypes we saw. But in core edition, they were just these definitive paths. You chose one of these paths going forward, and then they kind of melded them into those archetypes. I can't remember, honestly, if that. I do love it. I do love the Dex Con save. I love that way more. But I can't remember if that was an artifact from that early age. It shows you kind of my personality. I just remember the things I hated. And I remember advantage, disadvantage going, oh, that's a good idea. They should do that. But I can't remember. I remember the contested saves, though, right? So, no, there weren't save throws because everything was contested.
Right.
So you made an ability check. So you would roll a Dex check every single, but that was it. It was just contested. So that is still in effect, but now the saves are fixed rather than these two people having to roll. That was the big thing, because my biggest complaint with 3.5 and Pathfinder is that it's designed for players, and 4th edition was designed for the game masters. It's like, you know what? We have been giving the brass ring to players for the longest time, and we make GM's life a living hell. Let's make it easier for the GM to make the campaign. That's why 4th edition, that's why I love 4th edition so much, because I was the GM. 5th edition tries to create that hybrid by saying, okay, let's bring players back into the fold with those old school rules, but let's not alienate that GM, because that's the thankless job. So thankfully, I think that they're like, wait a second, we're going to make the GM roll every single time? I'm like, no, God, their job is hard enough.
Yeah.
Give these poor GMs a break.
Well, that is some interesting insight I hadn't heard into the old like D&D Next playtests.
Yeah, like I said, there's a down to that story though, unfortunately, because I was signed on to an NDA, and when Amethyst had its Kickstarter, I announced that we were making Amethyst 5th edition, but by then there was no announcement, none whatsoever, that there was going to be a 5e OGL. Now I knew from Joseph Goodman. By the way, this has never been public. This is the first time. This is exclusive.
Ooh.
I knew from Joseph Goodman how you could circumvent the OGL because he did it with 4th edition. He was releasing products for 4th edition before the GSL became legal because he knew he could use the 3.5 OGLs as the framework, which is, by the way, what everyone's doing now because everyone's using the old 3.5 OGL as a framework to produce 5e content. But back in 4th edition, no one knew that they can do that. So, so when I started supporting 4th edition, I get contacted by Mike Merle, say, hey, man, you want to join into the alpha playtest? I say, sure, absolutely. You got to sign the NDA. I'm going, sure, here you go. I'll sign the NDA. And then he reaches out to me right after I released or said I was going to release Pathfinder Amethyst. And Mike Merle's told me the entire future structure of D&D as we found it. This was this was almost 6 years ago now. So way before and before it got announced. So this thing about the 5th edition OGL, this DM's Guild combining with drive-through, I was told almost all of that years ago. So I knew that was going to happen. So I knew the OGL was going to happen. But I knew even if WotC pulled back and decided not to, which they could, I could still use the 3.5 OGL as the groundwork to make my game. So I still could do it. But a lot of third-party publishers were constantly getting after me going, you can't say that. You can't say you're going to be 5th edition compatible because you don't know you're going to be allowed to. And I said, look, Joseph Goodman knew how to do that. And so I'll just follow his lead. But I know that I will. And it was Morris from Endworld that cornered me and basically told me, like, you know something I don't. What do you know? And I said, look, but I can't tell you about it. I'm bound by an NDA. And he's like, no. He's like, screw that. This is just you and me, unofficial, off the record. What do you know? And I said, okay, just between you and me on the down low, I know 5th edition's going OGL because Mike Merle's told me. The next day, it's front page news on Endworld.
Oof.
And he named me too. Chris from Deus Ex Machina says 5th edition's going OGL. And I haven't talked to Mike Merles ever since.
Oh
yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, do you want to admit violating an NDA on this in this interview? But
I was not pleased. I was not happy. I was not happy at all. I felt that was very much a betrayal on that part. Because yeah, it was unfair. It was my fault. I should have done it. I shouldn't have said it. I thought I was selling someone in confidence. Turns out that wasn't in confidence, and I'll make sure I will not make that kind of mistake again. But it was a mistake that I made, and I got to pay with. I have the utmost respect for Mike, and I appreciate it. Now, the funny thing is that many years later, things didn't work out exactly as it worked out because we thought there were going to be a gaming system license in the 5th edition, and we didn't. We got the DM's Guild, which no big publisher signed onto because it's got a lot of restrictions. But they know, thanks to what we saw with 4th edition, that they can just use 5e and use the old 3.5 OGL as a groundwork, which is what we're all doing. So we now know how to make that work. And of course, I still put out my 5th edition book. But like I said, I was not terribly happy. I was not terribly happy about what went down there. I'm very guilty. As I said, it's entirely my fault. But yeah, it happened.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I'm a journalist, so it sounds weird to hear me saying this, but don't trust journalists. I mean, I'm kind of.
Well, the thing is, cat's out of the bag. I mean, if I was saying this now, I'd be like, I shouldn't be saying this. Like, oh, I really haven't, Yeah, like Brothers Bond. Brothers Bond, I could talk about because there was an NDA, but now it's public, so I can say I'm working on a Brothers Bond board game.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to highlight while we're here?
No, like I said, the campaign's running now. We're 2 days into it. Or actually, well, I'm not sure when this campaign's. It started on May 14th. So we funded in 48 hours. So I'm really hoping that this allows me to write full time, that I don't have to pick up a day job like welding or something, and then that'll be able to do this for a long time. And then if I am able to get to a number that's really good, and I don't have to find a day job, then I can actually produce this thing on a fast enough timeline. Because Amethyst took 5 years to make because I had to have a day job because I had to pay for things. And the hope here is that I won't have to do that. I can just do this full time.
Yeah, well, here's hoping. I mean, you're already fully funded. You're you just passed that. What, today, yesterday, somewhere in there?
It funded 38 hours technically in. So it funded at the time of this recording, it funded at 10 o'clock yesterday. So it funded 38 hours after launch. And we're about 105, maybe 110% now. I would really like to get Affinity unlocked because I'm much more I'm interested in mechanics, but I love writing settings a lot as well. So I think that's going to be really interesting. So
yeah, well, I mean, here's hoping.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great talking to you.
Great talking without. Yeah, and once again, apologize for the distractions, but
oh, it's all good.
But it's getting over this cold, and today's my proposal versity, so got to go out and celebrate with Indian food.
Heck yeah, man. Well, and for everybody watching us, have a good night.
Good night.
Hey, hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you can subscribe to us by hitting the subscribe button just below this video, and hit the bell to get notifications whenever we put up a new interview or tabletop game or whatever weird thing we're doing that week. And if you really like what we do, you can support us by subscribing to us at twitch.tv/Midgardia, which is also where we do tabletop games live, or becoming a patron on patreon.com/Midgardia. Have a good day.